All right, ready to dive into a philosophical rabbit hole. Today we're tackling moral luck, a concept that sounds like an oxymoron, right?
Absolutely. It's a real head scratcher.
I mean, how can morality, something we think of as being about choice and responsibility, be subject to the whims of luck?
Well, that's the paradox at the heart of it. It forces us to confront some uncomfortable truths about how we judge actions when things outside our control impact the situation.
And we're going to be exploring all these thorny issues using, primarily, the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy's entry on moral luck.
Yeah, a classic source.
Definitely. But even if you've grappled with moral luck before, today's deep dive is going to offer some fresh perspectives, I think. For one thing, we're going to break down these different types of moral luck.
Yes, absolutely. Resultant luck, circumstantial, constitutive, even causal luck. We're going to unpack all of them.
Oh, and we'll be dissecting the arguments for and against its very existence, right?
Yay.
I mean, some philosophers think the whole idea is incoherent.
Absolutely. We've got skeptics and acceptors, and we're going to delve into the implications of this whole concept for everything from legal systems to our personal relationships.
So yeah, buckle up, because we're about to embark on a philosophical journey that might just make you question everything you thought you knew about, well, responsibility, blame, free will, the whole shebang.
To start, though, we really need to set the stage. Let's revisit that foundational principle in moral philosophy, that idea that moral judgments should be based on factors within a person's control.
Okay, so we're talking about the control principle, right? The idea that we should only be held morally accountable for what we can actually control. It seems pretty straightforward, right? But I feel like there's a lot of nuance here.
Oh, you're absolutely right. This principle, it's got roots way back in Kant.
Right? Can't.
He argued that true morality comes from a goodwill, right? An intention
Right.
to act according to moral duty, no matter the consequences.
So for Kant, it's all about the intention, not the outcome.
Exactly. For Kant, a person acting with goodwill, even if their actions accidentally have some negative consequences, they're still morally praiseworthy. Conversely, someone acting with ill will, even if they happen to get a good outcome, they're morally blameworthy. Intentions are key.
But that seems to run into some serious challenges when we start to consider, well, luck.
Right.
I mean, our best intentions can be totally thwarted by stuff we can't foresee, and sometimes our actions have consequences we never could have predicted.
And that's exactly where this concept of moral luck comes in, right? It's about recognizing that factors outside our control, luck, can have a huge impact on our actions, and the judgments people make about them.
So to really understand the messiness of it all, it's helpful to break moral luck down into its different types. And maybe the most intuitive one is resultant luck, right? Where we focus on the outcome, even if that outcome is, determined by chance.
Yeah, resultant luck, it really gets at how the outcome affects our judgment of the person, even if the outcome was mostly chance. The classic example is like the two would-be murderers.
Oh, right, the attempted murder example.
One of them successfully kills their intended victim, right?
Yeah.
The other one, their attempt is just thwarted by some random thing like the victim tripping at the last minute. So, totally different outcomes.
But both of them acted with the same murderous intent, right?
Yeah.
But we tend to judge the successful murderer so much more harshly, even though the difference was just pure luck.
It's like we can't help but see the outcome as reflecting on their character, even when we know chance played a decisive role.
And it raises some pretty thorny questions about the nature of moral responsibility, right? If we're so easily swayed by outcomes, even when they're due to luck, how can we claim to be judging people solely on their choices, on what they control?
It almost feels like our gut feeling, our moral intuition, is at odds with that control principle, with Kant's idea.
You hit the nail on the head. The example of the two would-be murderers, it really exposes a tension in how we think about this.
Yeah.
This desire to judge based on consequences, butting up against the philosophical ideal of only holding people accountable for what's truly within their control. But let's move on to another type of moral luck. What about circumstantial luck?
Circumstantial luck. This one highlights how the situations we find ourselves in, often just by chance, can seriously shape our choices. It makes us ask, would we have acted differently if we'd been dealt a different hand in life?
It's like that thought experiment with the Nazi collaborator.
Yeah.
Would they have been the same person, committed the same atrocities if they just happened to be born, say, in Argentina instead of Germany?
A deeply unsettling question, and it forces us to confront the possibility that our moral character is more malleable, more contingent on things outside us than we'd like to believe.
It makes you wonder how much of who we are and what we do is really our inner self, and how much is just the circumstances we happen to find ourselves in?
This is where the debate about moral luck intersects with those big questions about free will and determinism, right? If our choices are shaped by factors outside our control, does that diminish our responsibility? Do we even have free will in the way we imagine? Heavy stuff.
Okay, so we've got resultant luck, circumstantial luck. What about constitutive luck?
Right, constitutive luck. This one's about how our very nature, our personality, our dispositions are shaped by factors we didn't choose. Our genes, our upbringing, our early experiences.
So if someone is prone to anger or cowardice, we have to consider how much of that is like their innate temperament or how they were raised, rather than some conscious choice they made.
And it raises questions about how fair it is to blame or praise people for traits that might be, to a large extent, a product of this constitutive luck.
Can we really hold someone responsible for being cowardly if their fearfulness comes from a genetic predisposition or some traumatic experience as a kid? It makes you rethink those times you've judged someone for a personality trait, for what seems like a flaw, without considering this kind of luck.
Definitely encourages more empathy and understanding, right?
Absolutely. Okay, this was one final type of moral luck we have to address. Causal luck.
Yeah.
And this is where it gets really meta.
Causal luck, it takes us right to the heart of that free will debate. It suggests that even our most deliberate choices, our seemingly free actions, are ultimately the result of a chain of causes and effects that goes all the way back to,
The beginning of the universe.
yes, it's the Big Bang, the whole deterministic picture. If we could rewind that tape of history, would everything play out the same way, including our choices? If so, then where does free will even fit in?
Right. If our choices are just the inevitable outcomes of a chain of events we don't control, stretching back to the beginning of time, then what does it even mean to say we could have chosen differently?
It really challenges our notion of agency, makes you wonder if our choices, even our character, are more entangled with this web of cause and effect than we like to think.
So we've got these four types of moral luck, each one kind of chipping away at this idea that we're totally in control, deserving of either praise or blame for how things turn out.
It's a real philosophical puzzle, isn't it? And where we go from here, how philosophers try to grapple with these challenges to our traditional views of morality, that's what we'll be digging into in the next part of our deep dive.
So stay tuned, because things are about to get even more philosophically intriguing.
Welcome back to our deep dive into moral luck, where we're really picking apart this idea that challenges how we think about responsibility and judgment.
Yeah, we've already gone through those four types of moral luck: resultant, circumstantial, constitutive, and causal, and seen how each one reveals these subtle ways that factors beyond our control can influence our actions and how people judge those actions.
And now we're going to get into some of the really thorny philosophical questions that come up when we acknowledge this, when we say, okay, moral luck exists.
So like the big one, right? If we accept that moral luck is a real thing, a real phenomenon, does that mean we have to just throw out the whole idea of moral responsibility, like start over?
Well, that's the question that has divided philosophers, really, into two main camps. You've got the moral luck skeptics on one side, and then you have the moral luck acceptors on the other.
Okay, so two different camps. Let's start with the skeptics. What are they saying?
Well, the moral luck skeptics, they argue that despite, how it seems, there's no real moral luck. They think our judgments are often clouded by incomplete information and a tendency to overemphasize the role of chance.
So they're saying we're essentially misinterpreting situations.
Yeah.
We see external factors and we mistake those for true moral agency.
Exactly. One of the common arguments they make is this thing called the epistemic argument. It basically suggests that we rarely have perfect knowledge of someone's intentions, their motivations, or all the circumstances they were dealing with when they acted.
So we end up relying on the outcome, on the results, as a kind of proxy for judging all that internal stuff, even though the outcome itself might be heavily influenced by luck.
Right. Remember the example of the two would-be murderers. We tend to judge the successful one more harshly, maybe assuming their success means they were more committed to their plan. But the skeptic would say, hold on, we don't actually know that.
Yeah, maybe the one who failed was having second thoughts, or deliberately missed, or just wasn't as good with the weapon. We can't know their character just from the outcome, which involves so much chance.
Right. The skeptic would say the difference in outcome, it doesn't necessarily reflect a difference in their moral character. It's more that we can't see into people's minds, get the full story.
So for the skeptics, the problem isn't with the whole control principle itself, but with our ability to apply it correctly, right? Like in the real world, things get messy.
That's a good way to put it. They think if we had complete knowledge of everything a person's intentions, their motivations, every little detail of the situation, then we could make accurate moral judgments. Judgments that truly line up with the control principle.
Okay, I see how that view tries to, like, rescue our traditional understanding of moral responsibility. But what about the other side, the acceptors? What do they say?
The moral luck acceptors, they say, look, luck plays a big role in our lives, and that has real consequences for how we should think about moral responsibility. They argue that the control principle, while nice in theory, might just be too rigid, too idealistic to work in a world where chance is just like a fact of life.
So they're saying that even if it feels unfair, we might still be responsible for things that are influenced by luck.
That's the core of their position. They're not denying that intentions and choices matter, but they're saying the consequences of those choices, even if they involve luck, can't be totally ignored when we're judging someone morally.
But how do they square that with the idea that we should only be held accountable for what's in our control? That seems like a basic contradiction.
Well, there are a few different ways they try to do that. Some argue for a more nuanced understanding of the control principle, one that allows for like degrees of responsibility.
So instead of saying we're either totally responsible or not responsible at all, we could say we're more or less responsible depending on how much luck was involved.
Right. For example, we might hold someone more responsible if they took a reckless gamble, knowing the outcome depended heavily on chance, compared to someone who had the same intentions but was super careful to try to avoid a bad outcome.
That does seem more realistic.
Yeah.
Recognizing that the line between what we control and what we don't, it's not always so clear.
And some moral luck acceptors go even further. They say our responsibility, it goes beyond our specific actions. It includes what kind of person we are, the character traits we cultivate, the values we embrace.
So even if a particular action is influenced by luck, we can still be held accountable for the underlying stuff, the dispositions that led to that action.
Exactly. Like if someone acts impulsively and causes harm, we might hold them responsible not just for that specific act, but also for their general lack of self-control, even if that lack of self-control is partly due to their personality or how they were raised.
It's a way to acknowledge constitutive luck without just letting people off the hook for who they become.
And then there's, maybe, the most radical take on moral luck acceptance. It comes from this philosopher, Michael Zimmerman. He argues that we're responsible for what we would have done in tons of hypothetical situations, even if those situations never actually happened.
Wait, so our moral record, it's not just based on the choices we make in this life, but also the choices we might have made in other circumstances. Even if those circumstances never came up, how can we be held accountable for things that never even happened?
It is mind-bending, right? But Zimmerman says our moral character, it's not just about the choices we make in this timeline, but about the underlying stuff, the dispositions and values that would guide our actions in all these possible worlds.
So it's like our moral responsibility is determined by all our counterfactual selves, by the choices we would have made in all these what-if scenarios.
It's definitely a controversial view, but it shows just how far some philosophers are willing to go to make moral luck fit with our sense of responsibility.
This is really making me think differently about moral judgment. But before we get too abstract, too theoretical, let's bring this back down to earth. How does moral luck play out in the real world? What are the implications for how we live and make decisions?
That's a great point. Because moral luck isn't just some puzzle for philosophers to argue about. It has big implications for how we think about the law, about social justice, even our personal relationships.
Okay, so let's start with the legal system. How does moral luck mess with our attempts to create like a fair system of punishment?
Well, it raises all sorts of tough questions about how we determine guilt, how we decide on punishments, how we balance accountability with this recognition that luck can play a huge role.
Like, remember we talked about attempted versus completed crimes?
Mhm.
If two people try to commit the same crime, but one gets lucky and succeeds, while the other one fails because of bad luck, should they be punished differently? The control principle seems to say they should get the same punishment, but our legal system doesn't always work that way.
Exactly. And that difference shows the tension between this ideal of holding people accountable only for what they control and the reality of the legal system, which has to deal with messy real-world cases where luck often makes the difference.
It feels like moral luck forces us to face these trade-offs, these conflicting values.
Yeah.
We want people to be held accountable. We want to prevent crime, but we also want punishments to be fair, to take luck into account.
It's a tough balance to strike, and there aren't easy answers. But by acknowledging moral luck, we can at least move past simplistic ideas about guilt and punishment and try to find a more nuanced, more compassionate approach.
It also seems like moral luck changes how we think about social justice, right? How resources are distributed in society.
Oh, absolutely. The idea of luck egalitarianism has become really important in the last few decades as philosophers and political theorists try to figure out what moral luck means for fairness and equality.
Okay, so luck egalitarianism. It's about recognizing that a lot of the advantages and disadvantages we have in life, they're mostly just a matter of luck, not merit or effort.
Right. That's it. Things like what family we're born into, the economic conditions we grow up in, our natural talents, even our health and looks. These are all mostly determined by chance.
And luck, egalitarians say a truly just society would try to lessen those inequalities, like compensate for the uneven distribution of luck, the good and the bad.
That's their core principle. They say we should aim to create a society where people's chances in life aren't so dependent on the luck of the draw and where everyone has a fair opportunity to thrive no matter how lucky or unlucky they were at the start.
It's a compelling idea, but I can already hear the objections. People might say it's impossible to completely separate what people deserve from what they've achieved, even if their achievements were helped by good luck.
That's a common critique, and it gets at this whole debate about the relationship between luck, responsibility, and desert. Critics of luck egalitarianism worry that it discourages hard work and personal responsibility if people think society will always step in to fix things when they have bad luck. And they worry that creating a perfectly level playing field is just impossible because life is inherently random and unpredictable.
So it becomes a debate about values,
Yeah.
right? Do we prioritize equality of opportunity, even if that might undermine personal responsibility? Or do we prioritize individual freedom and responsibility, even if that means accepting some level of inequality that's due to luck?
Those are some of the fundamental questions that moral luck forces us to confront. There are no easy answers, but by having these debates, hopefully we can move toward a more just society, a society that recognizes both the importance of individual agency and the huge impact of luck on our lives.
This deep dive has really taken us through the whole philosophical landscape of moral luck, from the different types to the arguments for and against it, and how it plays out in things like the law and social justice.
And in the last part of our deep dive, we'll zoom in on the personal level. We'll explore how being aware of moral luck can change how we see ourselves, our relationships, and our place in the world.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been wrestling with this whole idea of moral luck, and it's really challenged how we think about responsibility, blame, even free will. But now I'm curious, how do we actually live with this idea? How does understanding moral luck change how we see ourselves, our relationships, our place in the world?
Yeah, it's a question that takes us from, abstract philosophy to the real world, our everyday lives, because it's one thing to get the concept intellectually, but it's another to actually let it sink in emotionally, psychologically.
So let's get personal here. How does moral luck affect how we relate to other people? How does it change how we judge people, including ourselves?
Well, I think it encourages more nuanced perspective, a more compassionate one. It pushes us to look beyond those surface judgments, the ones based just on success or failure. It helps us remember that luck has shaped everyone's journey in ways we don't always see.
So instead of just labeling someone a success or a failure, we start to consider those unseen factors, the privileges, the opportunities, even those random events that have contributed to where they are now.
Exactly. Someone might seem incredibly successful, right? Thriving career, loving family, perfect life. But a lot of that could be due to things they didn't earn or choose. Being born into wealth, having good genes, just being in the right place at the right time.
And on the flip side, someone who seems to be struggling, who's had a lot of setbacks, made what look like bad choices, they might be carrying a much heavier burden of bad luck than we realize.
Right. They might have faced huge obstacles from a young age, poverty, abuse, illness, or just encountered a string of unfortunate events that threw them off course.
It's like that saying, don't judge someone until you've walked a mile in their shoes. But understanding moral luck adds this whole other layer. Don't judge someone until you've walked a mile in their shoes and been dealt their hands.
I love that. It's about cultivating a deeper empathy, recognizing we're all navigating a world where chance plays a huge role. And judging solely on outcomes can be so unfair.
I can see how acknowledging moral luck can make us more forgiving, more generous towards others. But it also makes me wonder about how we judge ourselves. Does it make us more self-compassionate? Or does it lead to feeling like we have less agency, like our choices don't matter as much?
It can be a little bit of both, to be honest. On the one hand, seeing how luck has played out in our own lives can be really freeing. It takes the pressure off this idea that we're totally responsible for every single outcome, every success, and every failure.
Yeah, because if we accept that luck is part of it, then we can focus more on making the best choices we can given our circumstances, rather than obsessing over achieving some perfect result, which might not even be possible.
Right, and that can lead to a lot more self-compassion, especially when we hit a rough patch or we mess up. Instead of beating ourselves up for things that were at least partly outside our control, we can acknowledge the role of luck and focus on learning and moving forward.
It's like moral luck gives us permission to be kinder to ourselves, to realize we're all just doing the best we can with the cards we've been dealt.
I like that. But you're right, there's a potential downside too. For some people, acknowledging the influence of luck might make them feel like they have less agency, like their efforts don't matter as much because it's all just chance anyway.
It's like that classic debate about free will and determinism, but playing out within each of us. If we really believe our lives are heavily shaped by things outside our control, does that make us less motivated to strive, to make choices, to shape our own destiny?
It's a valid concern, definitely. But I think there's a way to embrace the reality of moral luck without falling into, like, a hopeless despair.
So how do we find that balance? How do we acknowledge the role of luck without undermining our sense of agency?
It starts with recognizing that even if things outside us shape our lives, we still have the power to choose how we respond to those circumstances. We can still make decisions, set goals, cultivate virtues, and act according to our values.
So it's about focusing on what we can control, our attitude, our effort, our responses, even as we acknowledge those limitations that fate throws at us.
Exactly. And in a way, that makes our choices even more meaningful. Because if we're aware of the role of luck, the good and the bad, then we can really appreciate the power of our own agency even within those circumstances we didn't choose.
It's like saying our choices matter because luck is a factor. It's that interplay between chance and our own agency that gives our lives meaning and purpose.
Yeah.
But I'm also thinking about how moral luck changes our perspective on, like, those bigger social issues, those systemic things.
Right. It definitely challenges us to rethink how we view fairness, equality, and the role of government in addressing social problems.
We touched on luck egalitarianism, the idea that a just society should try to smooth out those inequalities that come from the uneven distribution of luck. But how do we go from that abstract ideal to actual policies, to real-world action?
It's a complex issue, and people are still debating it. But I think acknowledging moral luck makes us more sensitive to the ways that arbitrary factors, things like our socioeconomic background, race, gender, even our physical abilities, can create barriers to opportunity, to a good life. It makes us ask, how can we create a society that gives everyone a fair shot, regardless of the circumstances they were born into?
It's like shifting our focus from judging individuals to creating a more just system, a more equitable one. Recognizing that a lot of the disparities we see, they're not just the result of people's choices, but they're deeply connected to this uneven distribution of luck.
And it encourages us to be more compassionate, more understanding in how we interact with each other, to remember that everyone is carrying their own burden of luck, good and bad.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into moral luck, I'm left with this sense of both humility and possibility. Humility, because it forces us to see the limits of our control, the huge impact of chance. But also possibility, because it reminds us that even in a world where luck plays a part, we still have the power to choose, to act with compassion, to try to create a more just world.
And to appreciate each moment, right? Knowing that even the smallest acts of kindness, of generosity, can have a ripple effect, creating good outcomes that might never have happened otherwise.
So as we navigate this complex thing called life, may we do it with this awareness of chance, a deeper empathy for ourselves and others, and this commitment to making the most ethical choices we can, knowing that even small acts of goodness can make a real difference. Thanks for joining us on this philosophical journey. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.